Cool. Thanks a lot. I think I'm ready. Hi, everyone. Again, Paul with Great Lakes Commons. I don't have a slideshow, so you'll just be looking at me or listening to me. You've read the proposal. There were some questions put in the working document on Monday and also I think today. Done my best to answer those as well. So if you haven't read those, a bit more clarification there. But Great Lakes Commons was founded about 7 years ago to address the question of Great Lakes governance as a bioregion that obviously crosses many political boundaries. And so we're not focused on one or two particular issues of water pollution or privatization. We're looking at the underlying ethics and how decisions are made across this bioregion. So we've been focusing on projects that really sort of highlight and illustrate what that relationship currently is and what that relationship could be. And we've been building alliances across the lakes amongst the sacred water sort of community, against the water justice community, some of the water policy community, and how water obviously connects to other issues of food and place and identity, energy issues. So we've been focusing more on this idea of water aliveness for this project, for this Living Great Lakes project, thinking more about kinship versus ownership. There's been a real sort of rise, I feel, in some of these discourses around our connection to so-called environment. There, you may have seen the rights of nature sort of efforts, rights of rivers or water personhood. One of our members of our group actually launched a petition in Canada for personhood, legal personhood for parts of the Great Lakes in Canada. There's also a network and a group in Wisconsin doing similar work. There's been recent efforts to sort of recognize monomen or wild rice as having rights as well. And recently I even heard about a podcast looking at glaciers and the beingness and sentientness of glaciers. And so I think we're sort of at a moment of rethinking some of our environmental protection strategies and in some ways trying to transform some of these relationships that obviously echo out into larger issues of bioregionalism and resilience. And so we're sort of within all of that sort of mix of trying to figure out where we're going with this. At the same time, we're also tracking and a part of a rise of Indigenous-led movements around recognition and rights. And we see water as a key catalyst for that. Obviously, Standing Rock was a major milestone obviously within the arc of many other Indigenous-led movements, but really making the idea of water is life, water is sacred more mainstream. And that work continues here across the Great Lakes as issues of pipelines and sort of settler politics sort of play out. And so we're trying to combine a project of water aliveness with a project that is looking at Indigenous ways of relating and governing at the same time. And so the money we're asking for this Living Great Lakes project is to really help us come together in space, in physical space, on the water and on the land. We've had a gathering a couple of years ago where a lot of things got launched, including our Great Lakes Commons Charter, but we haven't had a chance to come together as a community face-to-face in a couple of years because of lack of resources. We've been spending the last few years developing and prototyping various projects that are illustrating and sort of sparking our imagination around some of these relationships, be it a collaborative map or a currency project or a journeying project. But we really are trying to accomplish two things with a gathering this fall. We're doing some of the groundwork right now through a related strategy grant, but we're trying to sort of think deeper and be a bit more consistent in what are we trying to create as an organization in terms of our leadership team. How are we going to organize that and get the sort of more ongoing commitment for the work ahead? And we're also continuing to sort of try to braid a governance model that is based in commons principles and also Indigenous relationships and laws to the Great Lakes. And so our bioregional strategy is obviously Great Lakes focused. I mean, I'm calling here today from Toronto. Great Lakes Commons is a legally based, U.S. has a sponsor in the U.S. For our part of our work, for our main work. And there's also an Ontario-based nonprofit that also holds up this work. So the work we're doing right now is funded through our Canadian sort of organization, and the work that we're applying for here, and we've been most successful in, is through the States, through our fiscal sponsor. So it's been a challenge trying to coordinate and fund work with capacity across these international borders. But we're trying to sort of combine this idea of a leadership gathering with strategy making that's more long-term within this context of water aliveness. And so here we're going to be experimenting and practicing what does it mean to sort of show up as part of the water itself, asking the question, how is water activating us into this work? We are trying to show up as a governance body that's not just about who we are as individuals or what nation or geography we're from or what issues we are passionate about or what organizations represent. We're trying to practice and model this idea of showing up as part of the watershed. As many of you probably know, 70% of us is water, and there is a lot of all life depends on water. And so the idea of water aliveness and sort of that sort of continuum of we ourselves being part of the watershed as water bodies, being an accessible or a more accessible way of thinking about these sort of kinship relationships that can be very conceptual. We're trying to animate those a bit further. And so that's what we're sort of doing with our effort for this project, Living Great Lakes. And we're working obviously with a team of people that we've been working with for years, but also we're trying to build that circle as well across the entire Great Lakes. So I think that's almost 7 minutes. I saw Mary's hand waving. I'd love to address any questions, and also I did answer some questions on the worksheet earlier today.
Yeah, Jenny.
I don't have a question. I just have a great appreciation for the way that you're talking about your work, and I'm learning a lot from it. And I really appreciate you all doing this work. Thank you. That's all.
Anyone else have any clarifying questions for Paul?
I guess I had a question. Can you give us an example of a specific project that might come out of this fall gathering?
Totally. And so we're also planning like an event before the gathering, and we're trying to think strategically for what's going to happen after the gathering. Some of you may know that the citizens of Toledo recently passed a law to give legal rights to Lake Erie, or at least their ability to protect Lake Erie for itself, which is being challenged in the courts. And so we feel as if, and there's also many examples internationally of giving rivers, for example, rights. And so we feel there's an opportunity here to work with some of these legal strategies for water personhood or rights of water with this, because often what these legal agreements result in is a form of having people who represent the guardians of that lake and sort of individuals, be they from an indigenous nation or from one of the settler states, to speak on behalf of the lakes, kind of like, I guess, the Lorax. And so we feel this work that we're doing is experimenting and prototyping. Well, how does one go about doing that? How do we start, and how do we actually think about what guardianship is, and what are some of the ways in which we can, what kind of questions are we asking, and what types of gatherings and conditions are we creating, so that when we are imbuing sort of personhood, even legal personhood, to some of these watersheds, we have an equal amount of social, emotional, somatic experiences for channeling that decision making, because ultimately it's going to be humans who are expressing their connection or their desire. And so part of this work is trying to inform that part to complement the legal end of these things. We feel as if otherwise the legal end of this is going to dominate the debates, and it's going to be money versus money over who's going to ultimately defend the voice or the rights of these watersheds. And so by trying to create the conditions where we're actually practicing, both Native and non-Native people in the Great Lakes are practicing and sort of even being asked to show up as part of the watershed, we're going to lose that not only possibility, but obviously we're going to give away the potential here as well. So hopefully that answers your question in terms of, we would document and sort of follow up a fall gathering with each person going back to their local watersheds and replicating these experiences of how do we show up as part of the watershed, so that we can start to have and get used to this kind of literacy, this type of infusion in more locally, to then sort of help spread that articulation, and then that sort of hopefully then join with these legal strategies. And I think most of the legal strategies, in my mind, politically, are not so much powerful in their legal potential, but what they do is they open up a whole new sphere of imagination and possibility that didn't yet exist. Many of the linear ways of addressing individual environmental issues is what has been compared to like playing whack-a-mole. And so I think part of what many of us here are trying to create is a different form of not only consciousness, but practice that can sort of, again, transform some of these nature-human relationships, not only legally, but socially and emotionally and spiritually as well. So hopefully through documentation and through storytelling, we can do that. Thank you.